attracts young, productive people. Thank you very much, Dr. Sinake. We're going to turn to our next speaker, Dr. Rahma Hassan, who is a socio-economic researcher at the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi and currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University in Boston, working on pastoralist livelihoods and humanitarian response. Dr. Hassan has researched and published on resilience among pastoralist women, community, land, nomadic reproductive health, and urban inclusion in the Horn of Africa. Dr. Hassan has a strong community engagement background and focus on community livelihoods, land, and climate change. Dr. Hassan has worked with organizations, colleagues in both the Global South and the Global North to enhance meaningful engagement and grassroots research. Dr. Hassan holds a Master's of Arts degree from the University of Nairobi at the Institute of Development Studies and the Bachelor's of Arts degree first class from the University of Nairobi as well. And the department from the University of Nairobi's Department of Social Work and Sociology and Social Work, and has a PhD, a double degree from the University of Copenhagen and the University of Nairobi. Dr. Rahma Hassan, it's your floor now, and you'll have about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Moses, and everyone, and for the generous introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to share a bit of our work on in the Horn of Africa, in northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia, with colleagues at the Center for Research and Development in the Drylands. So this is an aspect of looking at the drylands, the pastoralists who occupy the rangelands in the Horn of Africa, and looking at the youth as reliability networks. And shortly, I'll be sharing with you what that concept means for us to engage with. So thinking about conflict and climate together, I think is an interesting aspect for us to look at the multiple crises that sometimes face the rangelands that many pastoralists live in these areas. So both the natural resource question, which is also interlinked with how the climate is changing. You know, we've been hearing, or we've been observing the questions of drought and natural resource related land questions, conflicts, which have been studied quite elaborately. But also there's a perception and framing where pastoralism has been viewed as a vulnerable mode of production, requiring recurrent relief and also the push for diversification by external actors. So it is within this context that we look at the pastoral youth and ask ourselves how these formal laws and rules from the state and from external actors meet informal community systems and the young people living in these areas. On one of the slides, I've put in this disconnect that would also help us to think about what comes from outside. And these areas are heavy interventions, have come in billions of dollars. We see reports about the interventions in pastoral areas, about relief and resilience programming. But then there is a counter question about what happens in practice within local communities, or maybe what would work. On the other hand, we have evidence, those of us working in pastoral areas, about this mode of production as being the most viable form of production in the rangelands. And within these variable environments and the uncertainties that revolve around this mode of production, pastoralists are able to transform this into variability. So for today, we'll be looking at pastoralism and pastoralist youth as form of a critical infrastructure. This is work by Emery Rowe, which looks at how high reliability groups of people are able to support systems within the rangelands and other forms of systems to keep the systems moving. So if we look at the youth as part of a critical infrastructure, what does that look like? So pastoralist communities on their own have their own support systems. Away from external interventions, they have the ability to make their own daily decisions, to think about future planning. If you think about early warning, or what we are now calling anticipatory action in the climate change language, how language is fast changing, and the ability to take advantage of opportunities in the rangelands. But the local networks and the repertoire of knowledge that exists within these communities is the most critical within how communities are able to take advantage of what exists within them. So there are multiple efforts and multiple resources, and the youth come in handy here as high reliability networks because of their ability to provide real-time information for future scenarios. I think information technology has already been mentioned by colleagues who've talked before me. And these real-time actions also based on their ability to be agile and mobile, and they're able to formulate innovative practices even within a mode of production that demands mobility across different landscapes. But their role is rarely acknowledged, which is a problematic issue for us to think about. So how do the youth support these livelihoods and peace? I've put in some of these activities during this is our ongoing 2-year research about how this growing demographic globally is engaging in transformative activities in the rangelands, and how the livelihoods of the people living in the Greater Horn of Africa are crucial based on this, this generational asset that we have. So the young people, young men and women. But it's also an important social inclusion question, and the need for different state actors and non-state actors to think about this generational advantage that we look at in the rangelands, especially given the multiple questions of conflict and climate that we deal with in the rangelands. So these local networks of peace and security are embedded in local forms of sharing and solidarity, which is also a very unique way in which we can look at pastoralist communities if we were to look at them differently from agrarian systems or other systems in the world, like the fisher folk. So this, there's some principles that we find that are emerging from this idea of high reliability. So if you were to look at the youth, you can see a photo there of a young man with a truck in one of the areas in the cross-border area of Kenya and Ethiopia. So their ability to possess knowledge and skills that are able to transform this variable environment into a stable environment. So everybody is talking about prediction, stability, but nobody is talking about when things are uncertain, like they are in the rangelands, what do we do? So we need these local reliability networks that are able to, look ahead, make real-time decisions. There's no time for planning for 5 years ahead because the system is uncertain and the variable environments are also different. Then thinking about the networks within which the youth are embedded within the community, the systems that work, the local elders, and even the migration and grazing systems. But what about the ability to understand the pastoral system, which is also a very important question about framing that we've been grappling with in our work, around how the system is misunderstood, and so the efforts and the interventions that come within this system from outside do not fit within what could work. But then thinking about the flexibility and the adaptability that the youth bring in this approach. So I'll give you some examples from our research, which are not exhaustive, just to show you examples of how pastoralist youth can be seen as high reliability networks. And the first one is around security, which is very important for the topic today. And the scouts that organize themselves in these areas, gathering real-time information on herding and where it's safe for people to go or what's happening. And of course, previously there would be like the movement and sharing of information locally, but then we have the mobile phones coming in here in social media. In terms of water, as you can see those donkey carts and motorbike owners offering transport services for ferrying water. And we know how natural resources like these are critical for this system. Think about the markets and the cross-border linkages, how the youth ferry milk with motorbikes from the herders in the fora, close to the milk collection points like the camel milk areas in Kulamawe, across Kenya, and some local transport and cooling systems within this vast drylands. But I've included there the mobile phone connections and the shopkeepers. And during drought, and especially from 2021, where we had 5 consecutive failure of rain, we see this as a very close connected high reliability network where people are able to borrow and share. And co-opting, or rather you can call transforming various forms of assistance that come their way to make it work for them. So youth in the Horn of Africa among pastoral areas are emerging as high reliability professionals around the core function of an important mode for production of pastoralism. And so exploring these networks is, I think, important for all of us in thinking about how we can go beyond the systems that are in place and, that often ignore this group of people that are a resource in this area. But then I was also thinking about high reliability as networks of peace, if we were to think about that topic. how can these internal mechanisms of young people be critical in supporting this infrastructure, how they are able to mobilize, share information, keep the conversations, but also important information to keep the solidarity going and reducing the conflict around these principles. So, of course, thinking about the resilience of these areas, we can see this as a grounded relational form of resilience. I heard from Sanake talking about ideas from below, and I think it's the same type of thinking around building resilience from below through the youth. And I think this is an important way of going back to the communities and asking ourselves about these important approaches that focus on local practices of what is working, looking at those relationships and the generational dynamics that are placed within these groups that can support these systems, whether it's through migration or through pastoral modes of production. So youth networks we find as very high local reliability professionals that are able to deliberate on this multiple action. And one of the things we could think about for policy conversations are about including youth networks in the interventions that are designed in these areas, whether they are these market interventions or regional cross-border early warning systems. And this idea of iteratively adjusting to the dynamic of these areas because the areas are uncertain. And, you know, the idea that we cannot have these flexible fixed systems in these areas or a one-size-fits-all kind of intervention from the states or non-state actors. So I put this picture here to show you that, of course, we are talking about an area that has been marginalized over time. So it's not to glorify the fact that there's no road network, neither is there like a very elaborate system of milk cooling. These are jerrycans of milk. But to say that people on their own, in their own systems, wherever they are in the cross-border region where we work, find their own ways of doing this, and the youth are at the center of managing both these natural resources, securing them, but also safeguarding the security in this area. So this is just a little encouragement, positive note of the youth in the Horn of Africa, just to show some of the important links in the pastoral system that keep this system going. Over, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for a very, very insightful presentation that speaks to, you know, the youth climate and you know, pastoral terrain connection. I think that's a very, very important dimension of the broader theme that we are concerned with. I'm going to quickly move on to our next